There are some moments, and if you think hard enough you will remember exactly when it happened, where you showed someone how you truly felt, and they used it against you. Maybe it was a flicker of excitement that someone dimmed with a single dismissive word. Maybe it was a moment of vulnerability that became ammunition in an argument weeks later. Maybe it was love, real, unguarded love, that someone held over you like a leash. You thought you were being honest. You thought openness was strength. What you didn't realize is that you had just handed a stranger a map to every pressure point in your psychology. Niccolo Machiavelli watched the courts of Renaissance Italy, the most dangerous rooms in the world, filled with men who smiled while sharpening their knives, and he understood something that the modern age has buried under layers of therapeutic language and self-help optimism. The person who shows everything controls nothing. The person who reveals nothing controls everything. This is not cynicism. This is the architecture of power, and it has been true for 500 years. It will be true 500 years from now. You were taught the opposite. From the moment you were old enough to be corrected, the world insisted that emotional transparency was a virtue. Be open, be vulnerable, let people in, share how you feel. And so you did. You performed your interior life for others, displaying your joy, your fear, your ambition, your insecurity, as though emotional exposure was the price of connection. What you were never told, what no one ever sits you down to explain, is that in a world populated by people operating from their own self-interest, your emotions are not a bridge, they are a blueprint, and whoever holds the blueprint of a building can bring it down. Ask yourself right now, who in your life currently knows exactly what you want? Who knows what you were afraid of losing? Who has watched you react to criticism, to rejection, to praise? Because that person, regardless of how much they love you, possesses a lever, and levers, even in the hands of people who care about you, eventually get pulled. This is not a paranoid fantasy. This is the observable reality of human interaction. Machiavelli did not invent this dynamic. He simply had the courage to write it down. The question this video asks is not whether you should feel. You will feel. You cannot stop that. The question is whether you must perform those feelings for an audience that has not earned the right to watch. And the answer, the one that will take everything you thought you knew about emotional health and turn it on its head, is no, you don't. In fact, the moment you stop performing, something extraordinary happens. You stop being manipulable, and a person who cannot be manipulated is a person who cannot be controlled. Here is what happens in the first 30 seconds of any interaction. The other person is not listening to what you are saying. They are reading you. They are clocking the pitch of your voice when a certain subject comes up. They are watching whether your eyes go wide when money is mentioned, or whether your posture collapses when someone challenges you. They are noting whether you answer a question immediately, the behavior of someone eager to please, or whether you pause, the behavior of someone who does not need to be liked. Every microsignal you emit is processed, categorized, and stored, not necessarily with malicious intent. This is what human beings do. We are all, at some level, reading the room for threats and opportunities. Machiavelli's prince was surrounded by flatterers. He wrote extensively about the danger they posed, not because they lied, but because they fed the prince's emotional needs so expertly that the prince became dependent on them. The flatterer studies your reactions. He learns what makes you feel important, what makes you feel feared, what makes you feel loved, and then he administers those feelings in precisely calibrated doses to keep you compliant. This is not ancient history. This is your coworker who knows exactly how to phrase a request to get you to say yes. This is your partner who has learned that a specific kind of silence makes you anxious enough to apologize for things that are not your fault. This is the friend who praises you selectively, just enough to keep you invested, never enough to make you feel secure. The manipulator, conscious or unconscious, requires one thing to operate: data. They need to know what you want, what you fear, and what you believe about yourself. And the primary source of that data is you. Every time you express frustration, you reveal what you value. Every time you express joy, you reveal what you are chasing. Every time you express fear, You reveal what you cannot afford to lose. Psychologist Robert Cialdini spent decades studying the architecture of influence, and what he found confirmed what Machiavelli had observed centuries earlier. People exploit predictable emotional patterns. Once someone has mapped your emotional landscape, influencing your behavior becomes mechanical. Now think carefully about this. How many of your current frustrations, the relationships that drain you, the negotiations that go badly, the situations where you always seem to end up giving more than you receive, how many of them can be traced back to a moment where you showed too much, where your face betrayed your desperation, or your voice cracked with neediness, or your enthusiasm was so visible that the other person immediately understood they had leverage? Carl Jung wrote that what you do not make conscious emerges as fate. In the arena of human interaction, what you do not control becomes a weapon in someone else's hands. This is not fate, this is physics, and the first step out of it is to understand exactly how thoroughly your emotions have been broadcasting your vulnerabilities to anyone paying attention. Write in the comments, when did someone use your emotional reaction against you? You will be surprised how many people reading this have the exact same story. Before you close this and decide that what is being described is coldness, the kind of hollow, effectless detachment you have seen in people you did not want to become, I need you to stay with this for just a moment longer, because you are about to misunderstand the most important distinction in everything Machiavelli ever wrote. He did not say, do not feel. He said, do not perform. These are not the same thing. In fact, they are opposite states. The person who suppresses emotion and the person who disciplines its expression are completely different organisms. The suppressor is constantly at war with himself, spending energy fighting what he feels, creating a pressure that eventually detonates in ways that are unpredictable and destructive. The person who disciplines expression feels everything and chooses what to reveal, when to reveal it, and to whom. One is a dam that is cracking, the other is a reservoir with gates. One is controlled by his emotions because he has made them his enemy. The other controls his life because he has made his emotions his intelligence. This is what Machiavelli called virtù, not moral virtue in the religious sense, but a specific kind of disciplined capability, the capacity to act deliberately rather than react automatically. The prince who could sit in a meeting while being openly insulted and maintain a composed, even pleasant expression was not a man who felt nothing. He was a man who understood that his composure was itself a weapon, that it told the room nothing about his intentions while making everyone else extraordinarily uncomfortable. The person who does not react cannot be read. The person who cannot be read cannot be predicted. The person who cannot be predicted cannot be manipulated. Seneca, who understood the architecture of the mind long before modern psychology gave it language, wrote that it is a great thing to know the season for speech and the season for silence. Your emotions will tell you when something matters. Wisdom tells you whether to broadcast that information. Think about the people in your life who command the most instinctive respect, not fear, not admiration born of insecurity, actual respect, the kind you feel in your spine. Notice that almost universally these people share one quality. You cannot quite read them. They are warm enough that you want to stay close, but still enough that you never feel entirely certain what they are thinking. They respond rather than react. They pause before speaking. Their approval feels valuable because it is not given automatically. Their silence is not cold, it is deliberate. You have been around these people and felt, without being able to articulate why, that they were operating on a different frequency. They were. They have mastered the first principle of Machiavellian psychology. The exterior is a tool, not a mirror. I want to thank you for staying this far, because what comes next is the part that most people find easiest to understand and hardest to actually implement. We have diagnosed the problem. We have reframed the solution. Now we build the architecture of the unreadable mind. and I promise you, what follows is the most operationally useful framework you have encountered on this subject, because Machiavelli was not a philosopher who lived in abstraction. He was a man who watched real power operate in real rooms, and everything he left behind was designed to be applied. The first law of emotional mastery is what we will call the principle of the still lake. Imagine a lake on a day without wind. It reflects everything with perfect clarity: the sky, the trees, the mountains, the face of anyone who looks into it. But here is what the lake does not do. It does not move. It absorbs light without being changed by it. It reflects without being consumed by what it reflects. This is the operating state of the psychologically sovereign individual. You process everything. You are moved by nothing publicly. In practice, this begins with one of the most underestimated tools in the history of human interaction: the delayed response. Most people respond immediately to stimuli. Someone says something provocative and they react. Someone offers them something exciting and their face lights up. Someone delivers bad news and their body collapses. The delay, the pause between stimulus and response, is the space where power lives. Viktor Frankl, who understood the relationship between constraint and freedom better than almost anyone who has ever lived, identified this gap as the fundamental site of human agency. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom. Machiavelli would have read that and nodded. He built his entire philosophy in that space. Begin practicing the pause in low-stakes situations. When you receive a message that provokes a strong reaction, wait before responding, not because you are playing games, but because every time you react instantly, you confirm for the other person exactly where your triggers are. When someone makes you an offer for your time, your labor, your attention, do not answer immediately. Say you need to think about it. The pause creates uncertainty. Uncertainty is leverage. The person who always has an immediate answer is a person whose thinking is completely transparent. The person who pauses is a person whose thinking is private. The second law is strategic ambiguity. Machiavelli observed that the prince who is difficult to categorize is the hardest to oppose. When people cannot place you in a box, they cannot develop a strategy against you. In modern terms, this means resisting the compulsion to explain yourself fully. When you have made a decision, you do not need to justify it in detail. Justification is an emotional act. It comes from the need to be understood and approved. The person who has fully internalized their own authority does not require that approval. They state their position and let it stand. I have decided. I am not taking that direction. I am not interested in continuing this conversation. These are complete sentences. The person who adds, because I feel that, or because I think you will understand, is the person who is still seeking permission from the outside world to trust their own judgment. The third law is the management of positive signals. This is the one that surprises people. Most discussions of emotional control focus on anger, fear, frustration, the obviously dangerous emotions to display. But Machiavelli warned with equal force against displaying excitement, hope, and eagerness. When you want something visibly, you have already begun losing the negotiation for it. The buyer who walks into a room and immediately makes clear which item he cannot leave without will pay full price. The buyer who handles several items with equal apparent interest, who asks questions without urgency, who is genuinely prepared to walk away, that buyer controls the transaction. Apply this to your life. The job candidate who is visibly desperate will be lowballed. The person who pursues a romantic interest with undisguised longing will be kept in a holding pattern. The business partner who reveals exactly how much he needs the deal will give away his margin. Your desire is your business. Your strategy is what you share. The fourth law is the discipline of the neutral face. Not a cold face, not a hostile face, a neutral one. The face that gives nothing away is not a mask of indifference. It is a face that is fully in control of its own signal. In every high-stakes interaction, your face is broadcasting a continuous stream of information. Practice holding it steady, not forced, not frozen, simply still. When you feel the impulse to wince, or to brighten, or to furrow your brow in concern, let that impulse arrive and pass without landing on your features. This takes practice. It takes weeks of deliberate attention in mirrors, in low-stakes conversations, in moments where you catch yourself performing a reaction before you have decided whether it serves you. But the person who masters this is the person who, in the most important conversations of his life, gives the other party nothing to work with. Now we arrive at the truth that most people will understand intellectually and then proceed to ignore completely. Not because they disagree with it, but because applying it requires them to give up something they have been using as a substitute for actual connection, the performance of feeling as a plea for attention. Here is the paradox that Machiavelli embedded in his work and that almost no one extracts from it. When you become emotionally unreadable, something shifts in every room you enter. People stop being able to project their assumptions onto you, and when people cannot project, they begin to reveal. The person who is trying to manipulate you, who has calibrated their approach based on what they believe your emotional responses to be, encounters interference. Their strategy stops working. They adjust. They reveal a new strategy. They reveal the one beneath that. Without meaning to, in trying to find the lever that moves you, they show you exactly how they operate. The still lake does not just protect itself, it becomes a mirror that shows everyone else exactly what they are. This is the inversion that Machiavelli understood and that modern psychology has since confirmed through research into what is known as emotional contagion and social dominance. The person who manages their emotional state, rather than broadcasting it, draws others into a kind of attentional gravity. There is a reason that the quietest person in a room often holds the most power. It is not mystical. It is that silence, controlled and deliberate, forces others to interpret, to project, and in doing so to reveal themselves. You stop being readable. They become transparent, and the information asymmetry, who knows more about the other, shifts entirely in your direction. But here is what the application of this principle will actually cost you, because I will not pretend the price is small. You will be misunderstood. You will be called cold by people whose access to you has narrowed. You will be accused of being distant by people who were depending on your emotional availability as a mechanism for control. Some people, when they realize they can no longer read you, will simply drift away, and there will be a part of you, the part that was trained since childhood to believe that being understood is the same as being safe, that will want to break the discipline, that will want to explain, that will want to perform enough vulnerability to bring them back. That voice is the architecture of your old operating system. It is the system that was making you manipulable. You do not have to obey it. Machiavelli wrote that men are so simple and so much inclined to obey immediate needs that a deceiver will never lack victims for his deceptions. The immediate need he is describing is not greed or ambition. It is the need to be understood. The need for the world to validate your interior experience, the hunger for someone, anyone to see exactly what you feel and tell you it makes sense. This is the vulnerability that every sophisticated manipulator exploits. Not your finances, not your status, not your intelligence, your need to be seen. The moment you stop requiring that from people who have not earned it, you become, for the first time in your life, genuinely difficult to deceive. The question worth sitting with tonight, not performing for an audience, but actually sitting with in silence, is this: How much of your emotional expression has been authentic, and how much has been a strategy for obtaining something: connection, approval, sympathy, leverage? Because if you are honest, you will find that emotional display has almost always served a social function. You have been performing your interior life since you were old enough to understand that your feelings affected the behavior of people around you. The revelation is not that you should stop feeling, it is that you were never really showing people who you are. You were showing them what you needed them to see. Machiavelli would say, "Then you already know how to manage your presentation. The only question is whether you will begin doing it deliberately, on your terms, in service of your own interests, or whether you will continue doing it reflexively, on theirs." Most people who encounter this framework will nod, feel the truth of it, and then do nothing. They will walk back into their lives, and the next time someone says something that provokes them, they will react. The next time they want something badly, it will show on their face. The next time someone withdraws from them emotionally, they will pursue. This is not weakness, it is habit. And habits are not changed by understanding. They are changed by deliberate practice, repeated in moments of real pressure, until the new pattern becomes the automatic one. The person who walks out of this conversation and begins today, in the next interaction they have, practicing the pause, practicing the neutral face, practicing the withholding of their desire, that person is choosing a different kind of life, a life in which their inner world is their own property, not a public resource, a life in which they choose who receives access to their real self, and under what conditions, and for what reasons. A life in which manipulation, the ambient manipulation of social life, simply stops working on them, not because they have become hard, but because they have become sovereign. And sovereignty, as Machiavelli understood it, is not the absence of feeling. It is the mastery of what feeling becomes when it leaves you and enters the world. The empty room is not where you perform your emotions for an audience that is scoring you. The empty room is where you remember what you actually think, what you actually want, and what you are actually willing to protect it from. Go build that room inside yourself and let no one else hold the key.